Welcome everyone to Second Lives, a dialogue on food waste, which is organized by the NUS Enterprise-BoP Hub, joint initiative on social system innovation. So my name is Irsyad. I am your MC for today.
And the point I want to make is that before this food actually arrives into Singapore, some of it is already lost. What is the amount of food that we actually waste in Singapore itself? You can see that since 5 years ago until now, we have actually less food waste, all right, and we are actually recycling more and more each year, all right. It creeps up slowly, very slowly, but we are actually improving. How does that compare to the amount of food we eat? Okay, so we eat about 365 kilograms, so 114 is disposed enough for us to eat that 365. So some part of that is recycled, okay. So most of this food waste actually comes from retail outlets and households, okay, and F&B outlets. So I would say that for industry itself, there is actually a very, very high incentive for them to reduce their food waste. So that percentage actually is going down through the years. But for households, actually not.
And for me, doing the research as well in the space made me realize like the two biggest impact areas I think we can address it in the food system is really, number one, moving away from industrial animal agriculture, and that's leading to the whole alternative protein movement. And I think secondly, it's the food waste and loss problem, which I think is one of the biggest and I think underrated problems we're facing in the food industry.
And if you go to a lot of the farmers markets, you notice that nothing is perfect there. In fact, they pride themselves on it. If something is a bit strange in shapes, they call it wonky, and the wonky ones normally taste the best. They are unfortunately neglected by a lot of the big box supermarket chains. They need everything to be super perfect. Even an apple that is too big or too small are being thrown away. So there's a lot of unnecessary and frankly illogical waste in our system. And I'm just really happy that I work in an ecosystem where I'm surrounded by founders who are also very mission driven. So what we do is we actually pack our growth as a company as confetti snacks with hunger eradication. We work closely with United Nations World Food Programme. In fact, we are doing an island-wide #ColorForHunger campaign. It's going to be a colouring contest to raise money for United Nations and provide emergency food aid and meals to people who can't afford food and are starving.
For the first bucket of reducing wastage, I think there's a lot of opportunities to create like tools, technologies that can actually extend the shelf life and preservation of produce. In like food waste tech, I looked into things like bio-based coatings, ethylene suppressors and things like that, which there are companies, Peel Sciences, that are working on. A lot to still unlock in terms of actually digitizing and measuring our food waste and loss, because you can't really reduce something that you don't measure. And then there's also platforms that are basically matching data, supply and demand better in terms of closing the gap between supply and demand of our food so that we actually reduce it at the processing and distribution levels. And then if you're looking at the second bucket, which is managing waste, we don't just upcycle bread anymore and crust. We're also working on upcycling things like pumpkin and pineapple, lime, lemon peels, etc. And we also just work with Just Dapa, which is like a platform that is selling surplus food at discounted prices. And I would say another innovation opportunity and area that I think is really gaining traction now is marketplace platforms that are kind of redirecting selling surplus or ugly food at discounted prices to try to really maximize the demand of these foods instead of it going to waste.
So what I would look at is the community efforts at reducing food waste. Are there countries that have solved this problem? Yes. Okay, if you look at South Korea, they recycle 95% of their food waste. Okay, so how long would it take us to get from 19% to 95%? Okay, how do they do it? They have things like RFID bins, okay, automated bins, okay, to help you recycle the food waste. And the food waste is actually registered, okay, using your own personal ID card as a payment. So pay as you recycle. So this encourages people to actually, separate their food waste and recycle. The other one is actually at the production point. Okay, in Singapore, we don't have a lot of food production. So in South Korea, in Seoul itself, they have urban farms. Actually, they have more than 170 hectares of urban farms. If you have production closer to the source of consumption, there is a lot of efficiencies that you can have, right? You can actually collect that food waste and then you straight away you can recycle it. You don't have that much distance to lose the food waste over.
We just had a meeting with Sustainable yesterday. They make salad leaves at the end of the day, and they cannot always gauge exactly how much the restaurants need or the hotels need. So they always have a percentage which are surpluses. Not only do we salvage all these produce from being thrown away out of the system, how can we upcycle it to a higher purpose such that it brings more nutrients? At the same time, we are protecting Singapore's food security situation and helping us to achieve, 30 by 30. There are supply chain issues pertaining to actually collection of imperfect produce and also being able to organize with the wholesalers, the farms, and how do you actually congregate all these produce? Everyone needs to be aligned from a logistic point of view. I think that's the key. And of course, obviously, as a snack company, all the factories run by MOQs. So if we don't have sufficient produce, then we can't even comply to a minimum batch.
I was actually going to echo Betty that the supply chain and logistics side is our biggest challenge, I would say, or one of our biggest challenges. But I think on the R&D side, it's the fact that sometimes we come across ingredients that require a lot of work to be done in terms of R&D to find a use for them. An example is we recently started working closely with spent coffee ground. It was a bit challenging to turn it into beer because there was a lot of off taste and things like that, right? So then we further thought, okay, how can we use this for another product category, for instance, like a pancake mix? It's a challenge, but it's also kind of a beauty of having this problem is that we can pivot very quickly when the managing of the transport of the waste, how do you aggregate it when there's so many different streams? For instance, we started off working with different bakeries around Singapore to collect, surplus bread, but currently with the way that we want to operate, and if we want to scale, that's really impossible for us to collect from every single bakery. What we're doing is actually working with waste management companies. So it's about, collaborating with companies like that to try to streamline our logistics. And I think some of the challenges also comes when we are actually working with companies to help them reduce their wastage. Because I think the way that businesses in food service and retail hotels work currently is that they don't have the mindset that we're going to separate our waste, for instance, right? Separating waste streams is a big pain point because we don't deal with mixed waste streams. We deal with kind of pre-consumer surplus waste that needs to be separated, and often restaurants and hotels might not separate it unless we create the thinking and the infrastructure for them, for instance separation bins, in order to do that.
But it is true, logistics is one very key challenge, I would say, in terms of getting the supplies to the end consumers, and then especially sometimes in this semi-lockdown kind of state, it can get even more difficult with a high demand of drivers or even the shortage of manpower on the warehouse side. The better way to work around this, I think, is to involve the users, our community, to actually do self-collections, and instead of us distributing all over the island. Likewise, we work with hotels as well. Customers pre-COVID days and selectively now can go to hotel partners to take away food. So that's where we don't even involve multiple point distribution of surplus, and yet we attain the objective of ensuring that the food is safe to consume and also fresh in its taste.
We use the ulam raja as a hop substitute, trying to create hyper-localized food models. When you use hops for beer, hops is imported from very far away, like UK, US, and so the carbon footprint from that also obviously contributes to the beer. So if we can work with partners like Edible Garden City to source hop substitutes and grow it locally here. I think measuring impact is another one of the challenge, things that we need to actively work on, and challenges sometimes because different waste streams have different impact numbers and metrics. It differs now that we're not just using bread, becoming a lot more challenging because we're working with various different types of waste streams, and each type of waste stream has a different amount of impact measurement or metric.
And just to add on to that, we are audited as well. So we are members to Upcycled Food Association. We conform with 8 of the 17 goals set forth by UN. And we are also accredited as a social enterprise by Business for Good. Do give the results of how much rescued veggies in terms of pounds that we have salvaged due to our production. Majority has to be either crop surplus or imperfect produce. So, when we work with our partners, say One for a Better Planet, a Center for a Responsible Future, we measure that. And that's something which is very important because the consumers want to know exactly what is the impact, we've actually achieved.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I think part of also measuring is actually using it as an incentive. So before I talked about changing the mindset of businesses in food, service and retail, to actually have the upcycling and managing of food waste mindset. And part of that for us is actually being able to measure the impact or waste reduction that they are able to make by either working with us or working with another upcycled company, translating that into carbon emissions reductions that they can actually use to track their own impact as a restaurant or hotel that is participating in upcycling initiatives, right? But I've talked to a few people at NEA about how we can actually create like a certification, for instance, right? If you work with an upcycling company, you upcycle X amount of your like wastage every year. How can you get a certification like LEED, for instance, right? Like for buildings, sustainable buildings, but actually like an upcycle certification that shows you, okay, this company has reduced how much of their food waste every year and resulting in how many points or how much carbon reduction.